The fog swallowed the sky, the sea, and even the shore itself. The villagers said it was hopeless, that no one could ever find their way home through such darkness. But inside the broken lighthouse, Theodore stood still, whispering for help. Then a gentle voice filled the silence with a message from God. "My dearest child, when you cannot see the light, do not fear. I am within you. Become the light, and others will find their way." In that moment, St. Lucia's lighthouse began to shine again, not from its lamp, but from the faith reborn in his heart. And when the lost boats followed that glow back to safety, everyone understood he hadn't come to repair a tower. He had come to restore his soul through the message God had written in the storm. If this moment moved you, please like this video, leave a kind comment, and subscribe for more stories of hope, healing, and quiet miracles. The morning sea stretched like a sheet of silver beneath a pale sky. The ferry moved across the water with a low hum, steady and patient, as though it carried more than passengers. Among them stood Theodore, his hands resting on the cold railing, his eyes following the endless rhythm of waves meeting waves. The salt air brushed his face and tangled softly through his hair. In the pocket of his worn coat, a folded letter pressed against his chest. Its paper had yellowed, the corners bent from years of waiting. He had written it long ago but never sent it. Some words are like that. They must live in silence until the heart is ready to let them go. Theodore looked toward the horizon. A faint outline of land rose from the mist, where cliffs touched the sky and a tall structure stood, St. Lucia Lighthouse. Its tower leaned slightly from age, the glass windows clouded with salt and time. Once, it had guided ships home. Now, it was only a shadow of its old light. As he watched the island grow nearer, a voice stirred within him, quiet yet unmistakable. "My dearest child," the voice said, gentle as a tide upon sand, "the journey home begins when you stop running from what hurt you. Do not fear the broken light, for even cracks allow my light to pass through." Theodore's eyes stung, though the wind gave him reason to blame it. He closed his hand over the letter. "I am trying," he whispered, though he was not sure if he spoke to the sea or to God. The ferry's horns sounded across the water. Seabirds scattered in elegant arcs, their cries mixing with the wind. The deck trembled slightly as the boat slowed. Theodore stepped back to steady himself, but the movement caused the letter to slip from his pocket. It fluttered toward the railing, fragile and free. Before it could fall, a strip of seaweed, dropped by a passing gull, landed across it and held it fast. Theodore froze in disbelief. The paper clung to the deck, as if the sea itself refused to let it go. He bent down, lifted it gently, and looked at the green ribbon that now draped across his letter. "Thank you," he murmured, a smile ghosting across his lips. "You nearly lost it," a woman's voice said. He turned. A woman stood a few paces away. She had dark curls tucked beneath a knitted cap, and eyes that reflected the color of deep water. She carried a roll of charts under one arm. "I suppose I did," Theodore said, "but maybe it was meant to stay." "I have seen stranger things," she replied. "The sea is full of decisions we never make." Theodore nodded politely. "I am Theodore." "Mira," she said with a smile, "I make maps. You could say I study how the world changes shape when no one is watching." "Ensa." "That sounds like difficult work." "It is honest work," she replied. "The sea never lies." They stood together for a moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of the waves. Then Mira gestured toward the island, drawing closer. "You are headed for St. Lucia, I think." "Yes," Theodore said, "to restore the lighthouse." "Then you are here to restore more than stone," Mira said softly. "That place remembers everything." When the ferry reached the dock, a woman waited at the pier. She wore a weathered coat and a captain's hat that had seen many storms. She nodded in greeting. "You must be the man who came to fix our old tower," she said. "I am," Theodore answered. "I am Naomi," she said. "The sea has been whispering about your return all morning." Theodore smiled. "Then I hope I do not disappoint it." Naomi chuckled quietly. "The sea is not so easily disappointed. Come, I will take you both to the lighthouse before the tide turns." They climbed into Naomi's small boat. Its paint was chipped, its engine coughed before settling into a steady purr. As they drifted away from the dock, the island grew clearer, rugged cliffs, twisted pines, and gulls riding the wind. Mira sat near the bow, sketching the coastline in her notebook. "The sea is like a memory," she said. "It always finds its way back to the shore." Naomi smiled without looking up. "And people are like ships. Some return when they are ready to face their storms." Theodore glanced toward the lighthouse that rose above the rocks. Its walls were scarred, its windows clouded, yet something about it still looked faithful. When they reached the landing, the air grew thick with the scent of salt and moss. The stairs that led to the tower were damp and uneven. Theodore climbed slowly, running his hand along the cold stone wall. The door creaked open beneath his touch, and the smell of dust and iron filled the narrow space. Inside, light slanted through the windows in fragile beams. The staircase wound upward in slow spirals, each step echoing faintly. Theodore's boots left marks on the dust that no one had disturbed in years. When he reached the lantern room, the sea stretched before him, vast, alive, and mercilessly beautiful. He pressed his hand against one of the glass panes. It was cracked, webbed with fine lines. The wind pushed gently against it, as if testing its patience. "This one is your first repair," Mira said behind him. Theodore nodded. "It looks broken, but it still holds." "Most things worth saving do," she replied. From a corner shelf, Mira lifted an old radio. "Someone left this behind." She turned the dial. Static filled the room, then a faint voice came through. "Coastal weather calm, light wind from the west. May the sea carry you safely home." "That is Elias," Mira said. "He speaks to ships that still remember this place. Some say he speaks to the lost, too." The voice faded into silence. Theodore looked out over the horizon. "It feels like the whole island listens," he said. "It does," Mira replied. "If you have something to say, this is a good place for it." He reached into his coat and took out the letter once more. The paper was soft, the ink slightly blurred from the sea air. He unfolded it, read the first line, and closed his eyes. "My dearest child," the voice of God returned, warm and steady in his heart. "The pain you carry is not a curse. It is the soil where forgiveness will grow. Let the wind take what you no longer need." Theodore exhaled long and slow. The sound of the waves below filled the silence. He folded the letter again and slipped it back into his pocket. "I think I will stay here for a while," he said. "There is something unfinished between me and this light." Mira smiled. "Then perhaps the sea has finally brought you home." Outside, gulls wheeled above the cliffs. The wind softened, as if listening. The tide rose to kiss the rocks and then withdrew, leaving behind a trace of foam-like handwriting upon stone. Theodore looked at the cracked glass one last time. It caught the faint sunlight and scattered it into gentle fragments across the room. For the first time in years, he felt peace, not the loud kind that silences thought, but the quiet kind that makes space for grace. He whispered a prayer without words. The sea answered with its endless breath, and in that moment, under the soft voice of the wind and the hum of the waves, Theodore knew that the true restoration had already begun. The next morning arrived soft and gray. A veil of mist wrapped around the island, making every shape seem half remembered, half dreamed. The sea breathed in slow rhythm against the rocks below, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine from the inland hills. Theodore woke early, the letter still inside his coat pocket, its paper warm from the heat of his body. He walked along the narrow path that curved upward from the lighthouse toward the monastery that crowned the hill. Moss clung to every stone wall, and droplets of last night's rain still clung to the grass. Mira walked beside him, quiet and steady, her steps matching his. Neither of them spoke much. Words seemed unnecessary when the entire island seemed to be listening. When they reached the wooden gate of the monastery, the air changed. It was still, almost expectant, as though the place itself drew breath. A tall figure stood sweeping the courtyard, a man with hair white as foam and eyes full of unspoken kindness. His robe smelled faintly of cedar and incense. "You must be Father Lucian," Theodore said, pausing by the gate. The old man smiled. "And you must be the keeper of the light that forgot to shine." Theodore blinked. "I suppose that sounds like me." "Then you have come to the right place," Father Lucian said, resting his broom against the wall. "Every soul that seeks silence ends up here, whether they meant to or not." He led them through a narrow hallway into a round chamber built of smooth cedar planks. In the center of the room stood a single wooden chair, lit by sunlight that filtered through a high window. The room was empty, except for the smell of old wood and something that felt alive. "This is the listening room," Father Lucian said quietly. "It has no microphone, no priest, and no audience. You come in, you sit, and you speak. The room remembers every word, though it tells no one. It is the safest place on the island." Theodore's fingers brushed the letter in his pocket. "And you believe it listens?" Father Lucian smiled gently. "I do not need to believe it. I have seen people leave lighter than they arrived." He motioned for Theodore to sit. Mira nodded to him and stepped back toward the doorway, leaving him alone in the circle of quiet. Theodore Saturday. At first there was only the sound of his heartbeat and the soft creak of wood under his weight. Then slowly he began to speak, not loudly, but clearly enough for the silence to catch every word. He spoke of regret, of things left undone and words left unsaid. He spoke of the person to whom his letter was written, and how fear had frozen his hand when courage was most needed. He spoke of years spent hiding behind the excuse of busyness, of nights when prayer felt like shouting into fog. "My dearest child," the voice of God whispered in his mind, calm and sure, "there is no fog too thick for me to find you. Your silence did not offend me. It only showed me how much you long to hear my voice again." Tears welled up, slow and unhurried. They fell onto his hands like small baptisms. He closed his eyes and felt something unclench inside him. The room did not speak back, yet somehow it answered. When he finished, he remained seated for a while, breathing slowly, the quiet around him deeper than before. Finally, he stood and opened his eyes. The air in the chamber felt brighter, though the sunlight had not changed. Outside the room, Mira waited with Father Lucian. She looked at him and knew without asking that something inside him had shifted. "How was it?" she asked softly. "It was like telling the sea a secret," Theodore said, and realizing it already knew. Father Lucian placed a hand on Theodore's shoulder. "You have done the hardest part, the rest is listening." They stepped out into the courtyard. The mist had begun to lift, revealing glimpses of the cliffs below. From the distance, the faint toll of a bell drifted over the air. "That bell," Mira said. "I have heard it once before, though no one has rung it in years." Father Lucian's eyes sparkled. "Ah, the sea bell. It belongs to St. Lucia's cliffs. It used to call sailors home. They say it sank long ago, but I think it only waits for those who will hear it again." Theodore listened. The sound was soft, almost imaginary, yet real enough to settle into his heart like a seed. "My dearest child," the divine voice spoke again, "the sound you hear is not lost time. It is a promise returning. He looked out toward the sea and nodded silently. "Then I will find it," he said to no one in particular. Father Lucian smiled knowingly. "Good. The sea rewards those who look with gentleness." That evening, Theodore returned to the lighthouse. The wind had calmed. Inside the tower, dust floated in narrow beams of light, and the cracked pane hummed faintly in the breeze. He sat by the window, his tools resting beside him, and wrote in his notebook. The room listened, and so did I. For the first time in years, his heart felt open. The next day began with the cry of gulls and the scent of fresh rain. The world seemed to have washed itself clean overnight. Theodore stepped outside the lighthouse, stretching his arms toward the soft light rising over the sea. The tide had pulled back, revealing long stretches of rock glistening like mirrors. Mira arrived at the foot of the lighthouse with her rolled-up maps and her measuring pole. She waved to him. "Good morning. I hope you are ready to get wet. The sea is generous today." Theodore smiled. "I have always found generosity to come with a price." "Then you will like this adventure," she said. They began walking along the narrow path that led down to the shore. Pools of seawater shimmered in the cracks of the rocks. Tiny crabs scuttled away as they passed. The air was full of the low hum of waves breaking against distant reefs. Mira knelt beside one of the pools and dipped her measuring rod into the water. "The currents have been strange lately," she said. "The sandbars shift, the rocks move. It is as if the sea itself is rewriting the map." "Maybe it just wants to be understood," Theodore said. Mira looked up at him. "Do you believe the sea can think?" He paused. "I believe it can remember." They continued along the rocks until they reached a shallow inlet. The water here was clear enough to see to the bottom. Something metallic glinted beneath the surface. "What is that?" Theodore asked. Mira crouched and peered into the water. "It looks like a bell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They waded in. The water was cold and bit at their ankles, but curiosity warmed them. With slow movements, they brushed away the sand and seaweed. The outline of an old bronze bell appeared, its surface covered in barnacles, its mouth half buried in silt. "The sea bell," Mira said in awe. "It is real." They worked together for hours, clearing away the debris. The bell was heavy, but they managed to lift it onto a flat rock. The metal was dull but still strong, the engraved letters faint but readable. It read, "May those who hear this find their way home." Theodore ran his fingers over the inscription. "It has waited a long time." Mira smiled softly. "Maybe it was waiting for you." As they rested, a quiet wind swept across the water. The air shimmered slightly, as if carrying a voice that was not quite sound. "My dearest child," the voice of God whispered again, "I hide my messages in places that require patience to uncover. You found this not with strength, but with tenderness. That is how faith sounds when it rings." Theodore bowed his head. The sea at his feet seemed to pulse with light. "Then let it ring again," he said quietly. By afternoon, they had carried the bell to the base of the lighthouse. Naomi joined them, her boots soaked from walking the tide line. "So it was not just a story," she said, running a hand across the bell's surface. "No," Mira said, "and it still holds its voice." Naomi looked toward the horizon. "Then we should give it back to the wind." They found a sturdy beam along the cliff path and hung the bell there, tying it with strong rope and iron bolts. When the work was done, they stepped back. For a moment, the bell hung silent, motionless. Then a soft gust moved through the cliffs, and the bell gave a single low note, deep, gentle, and full of longing. The sound traveled far, across the rocks, over the water, through the mist. It seemed to touch every part of the island. Fishermen in their boats turned their heads toward it. Birds circled higher in the air. Mira closed her eyes and smiled. "It sounds like forgiveness," Naomi nodded. Or maybe memory. Theodore listened, his chest tightening. No, he said softly. It sounds like home. My dearest child. The divine voice whispered one last time before the wind swallowed it. The bell does not ask who you were. It only calls you to return. They stood there until the light began to fade, watching the sea shift from silver to blue to quiet darkness. The bell rang once more before the evening came, and its echo lingered like a promise that refused to end. Theodore looked at the lighthouse, its cracked glass reflecting the last rays of the Sunday. For the first time, he no longer saw ruin. He saw a place for learning to heal. That night, the island was calm. The bell sounded at intervals through the darkness, and each tone seemed to reach into Theodore's dreams, reminding him that every broken thing, if given time and care, can find its voice again. And when the morning light touched the tower once more, he woke with a steady heart, ready for whatever waited next. Night settled over the island like a soft gray cloak. The air was cool and smelled faintly of salt and pine resin. The lighthouse stood still against the sky, its cracked glass catching bits of moonlight and turning them into fragile halos. Theodore sat near the lantern room, a cup of warm tea in his hands, while the waves below whispered in their steady rhythm. It had been 3 days since they raised the sea bell. Every evening since, the sound of its deep, patient voice had rolled through the air like a reminder that the world could still keep its promises. Mira sat nearby, sketching the coastline in her journal. Her pencil moved quickly, guided by instinct more than sight. I think this place is alive, she said softly. The cliffs breathe, the tide answers. Even the air seems to hold stories. Theodore smiled. Then maybe I am not imagining things. What things? She asked. That sometimes, when the light hits the walls here, I feel like someone is standing beside me. Not in shadow, but in presence. In sound. Mira looked at him for a moment, then back at her drawing. Maybe it is St. Lucia herself, she said. The keeper who refused to let her light go out even after the storms took everything. As they spoke, a low wind rose over the sea. The radio on the table crackled to life. A familiar voice drifted through the static. Elias here, weather turning faster than expected. A storm front building from the west. Secure anything that can move. Thank you, Elias, Theodore said, leaning toward the radio. We will stay ready. Mira frowned. We have no power yet. The generator is still broken. Theodore nodded. Then we rely on the old ways. They spent the next hour preparing. Mira gathered candles and lanterns while Theodore checked the windows and the roof. Naomi sent word from the harbor that the boats were tied, and Father Lucian promised to pray until dawn. When the first gust hit, it came like a shout. Rain lashed against the glass, and the sea began to pound the rocks below. The tower shuddered but stood firm. Thunder rolled across the horizon like an ancient drum. Theodore climbed to the lantern room and looked out. The cracked pane trembled, and water leaked through the edges. He pressed his hand against the glass and felt the chill sink into his bones. My dearest child, came the familiar voice, steady and close. You fear the darkness as though it were a stranger. Yet I made the night to remind you that light is not something you build, it is something you are. Theodore closed his eyes. He did not answer aloud, but he breathed deeply, and his fear began to loosen its grip. Mira joined him, holding a lantern that flickered in the wind. The generator will not start, she said. The wires are too wet. Then let us trust the light that does not need power, Theodore said. He placed the lantern on the table, and its small flame seemed too fragile to matter. Yet slowly, almost impossibly, the glass around them began to glow, not bright but warm, as if the tower itself remembered how to shine. Mira gasped softly. What is that? Theodore's voice trembled. It is light, Mira, just light. The glow filled the room until the cracks in the glass disappeared into radiance. The rain still fell, and the wind still howled, but inside the tower, calm reigned. Down below, Naomi looked up from the dock and saw the lighthouse shining again. Well, she whispered, smiling into the rain. So the stories were true after all. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sky was washed clean, a pale gold stretching across the sea. The glass in the lantern room was cracked no more. The fissures had sealed as if time had been rewritten. Mira stood beside Theodore, both of them speechless. Finally, she said, "Did you fix it during the night?" "No," he said softly. "I only believed it could be whole." She smiled. That might have been enough. "My dearest child," the divine voice whispered within him, "you are not a keeper of broken things. You are the one who reminds them they were never broken at all." And with that, the lighthouse began its new life, not as a monument of the past, but as a living promise to the sea. The day after the storm, the island awoke to stillness. The clouds were thin and white, drifting like slow ships across the sky. The air was full of the clean scent of salt and rain. Theodore walked along the cliffs, each step careful upon the slick stones. Below, the tide had drawn back, leaving behind wide pools of clear water between the rocks. They glimmered under the sun, small worlds of color and movement. Fish darted between patches of seaweed, and tiny shells shimmered like scattered pearls. As he knelt beside one of the pools, he heard a small voice say, "You have to look closely, or they hide." He turned and saw a little girl standing barefoot on the rocks. She could not have been more than 8 years old. Her dark hair was tied back with a piece of string, and her dress was patched but clean. She held a small notebook in one hand. "Good morning," Theodore said. "Are you one of the islanders?" The girl nodded. "I am Anya. I write about the tide pools." The tide pools?" "Yes," she said seriously. "Each one has its own story. This one," she pointed, "used to have a starfish named Callio, but she left last spring when the big waves came. I think she went looking for her sister." Theodore smiled. "That sounds like a brave starfish." Anya nodded. "Everything here is brave, even the quiet things." She crouched beside him and dipped a small stick into the water. A silver ring caught the sunlight beneath the surface. "Look," she said, "the sea left you a gift." Theodore reached into the pool and lifted the ring. It was simple and thin, the metal worn smooth. When he wiped it clean, he noticed a faint engraving inside, E and T. His breath caught. "This belonged to someone I once knew," he said quietly. Anya tilted her head. "Then the sea wanted you to remember them." He nodded slowly. "Maybe so." For a while they said nothing. The sound of waves and the calls of distant gulls filled the air. The sunlight made the water sparkle like glass. "My dearest child," the voice of God whispered in his heart, "I return to you only what you are ready to hold again. Do not mourn what was lost. Rejoice that it has found you in its own time." Theodore closed his hand around the ring. "Thank you," he whispered. Anya looked up at him. "Are you talking to the sea?" "Something like that," he said with a gentle smile. "Do you always come here alone?" "I am never alone," she said. "The tide comes and goes, and it talks if you listen." He smiled, hearing her words as more than a child's imagination. "You sound wiser than most grown people." "Father Lucian says I am old on the inside," she said proudly. "He says the sea gave me an extra heart." "Then you must take good care of it," Theodore said. "The world needs hearts like that." Anya grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "I already do." When the tide began to rise, Theodore helped her climb the rocks back to the path. Mira was waiting at the top, her hands on her hips. "You disappeared," she said. "I thought the sea swallowed you." "Almost," Theodore said, "but it returned something precious instead." Anya ran up to Mira. "I showed him the brave tide pools," she said proudly, "and the sea gave him a ring." Mira crouched beside her. "The sea does that sometimes. It knows what belongs where." As they walked back toward the lighthouse, Anya skipped ahead, humming a tune that matched the rhythm of the waves. When they reached the steps, she turned and looked at Theodore. "You should keep the ring close," she said. "It might know the way home." "I will," he promised. That evening he placed the ring on the windowsill beside the lantern. When the sun set, the last ray of light caught the silver and made it glow faintly. The bell on the cliff rang once, low and clear. Theodore closed his eyes. "My dearest child," the divine voice said, calm and steady as the tide, "you have begun to see that I am in every return. Every wave that leaves you carries love, and every one that comes back brings it home." He stood by the window until the stars appeared, their reflections trembling on the sea. Somewhere below, the tide pools filled again with moonlight, and the brave little starfish returned to her sister's side. And for the first time in years, Theodore did not look for signs of loss. He looked for proof of grace, and he found it in everything the sea touched. The morning came gently, veiled in golden mist. The sea was calm again, its voice a whisper instead of a roar. The bell on the cliff sounded once, a low and peaceful note that seemed to bless the island with silence. Theodore awoke before sunrise, as he often did now, and walked along the damp stones outside the lighthouse. The world smelled of salt and new beginnings. The waves rolled in slowly, leaving foam like lace upon the rocks. Each day since the storm, the light within the tower had shone softly, even without fuel or flame. It was not the brilliance of electricity, but a calm glow that breathed with the rhythm of the tide. Inside, Mira sat at the wooden table, spreading out a series of old papers she had found in the storeroom. The edges were frayed, and the ink had faded, but the handwriting was neat and elegant. "These were the lighthouse keeper's logs," she said as Theodore entered. "The last entries are almost 100 years old." Theodore ran a finger across the pages. "Do they say anything worth remembering?" Mira nodded. "Every line is a prayer, not the kind you find in books, but the kind spoken by hands that work through storms." She handed him a sheet. On it, written in careful letters, were the words, "May this light remain faithful, even when no one sees it." Theodore read it twice before speaking. "There is honesty in this, the kind that does not ask to be noticed." Mira smiled. "That is the kind that lasts." Later that day, Father Lucian visited the lighthouse. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When he set it down, a faint scent of cedar filled the air. "I thought you might need this," he said, unwrapping the bundle. Inside lay a small iron key, worn and beautifully simple. This once belonged to the original keeper. It was meant for the inner lock beneath the lantern room. Theodore turned the key in his hand. "And what is behind that lock?" Father Lucian's eyes glimmered. "Every keeper has left something behind, a message, a confession, or a truth too heavy to carry home." That night, as the sea whispered below, Theodore climbed the stairs to the lantern room. The lock was old, its iron rusted, but it still turned smoothly when the key entered. A faint click echoed through the chamber. Inside the compartment, he found a small wooden box wrapped in oilskin. He opened it slowly. Within lay a single folded page, sealed with red wax. The handwriting was elegant but trembling, as if written by someone whose hand shook with both age and hope. It read, "If you are reading this, then the light has chosen you. Keep it not as a job, but as a promise. When the storms come, remember that the lamp is never what shines. It is only what holds the flame. Theodore closed his eyes. The message felt like it had been waiting for him. My dearest child, the divine voice whispered gently, you seek strength in what you can build, yet my strength is the silence that holds the light steady when the wind forgets to rest. He bowed his head and whispered, then let me hold it steady. 1. He placed his own letter, the one he had carried for years, inside the box beside the old message. He sealed it again and locked it. The sound of the lock closing was soft but final, like the ending of a prayer. When he descended the stairs, Mira waited at the bottom. You look lighter, she said. Maybe I have finally put something down, Theodore answered. Then something new will have space to grow, she said. The bell on the cliff rang twice, its echo carrying over the water. The tide was rising again, and with it came a new calm that seemed to settle into the bones of the island. By the end of the week, word had spread across the island that the lighthouse had shone again during the storm. The villagers began to visit not with noise or curiosity, but with quiet reverence. Some brought small offerings, fresh bread, flowers from the hillside, candles that flickered softly in the wind. Naomi suggested that they share a meal together by the docks, a meal of gratitude. We have weathered many storms, she said, and sometimes the calm after is worth celebrating. The evening arrived with a lavender sky. Long tables were set up by the water, covered in cloths that smelled faintly of salt and wind. Children ran between the boats, their laughter echoing against the cliffs. The fishermen brought baskets of grilled fish, and Mira carried jars of honey and tea. Father Lucian came with loaves of warm bread. Even Elias arrived, carrying the radio that had warned them days before. When Theodore reached the dock, Naomi handed him a wooden bowl filled with soup. Sit, she said. You look like a man who has not shared a meal in too long. He smiled and obeyed. The sound of the sea mixed with the hum of gentle conversation. It felt like a gathering of hearts rather than people. Elias adjusted the radio dial, and faint music came through, soft and distant, like a memory returning. Mira leaned over the table. I never thought this place could feel so alive again, she said. Theodore nodded. Perhaps it was never dead, only waiting for someone to listen. As they ate, Father Lucian stood and raised his cup. To the light that kept its promise, he said, and to the hands that learned to listen instead of command. The crowd murmured in agreement. The seabell on the cliff gave a low tone as if joining the toast. But not everyone smiled. Jonah Hale, the island's mayor, sat at the far end of the table, his expression thoughtful. He had been the one to propose tearing down the lighthouse years ago, calling it a relic that cost too much to remember. Now he looked at it, glowing softly against the twilight, and seemed unsure of his own convictions. He rose, cleared his throat, and spoke. I once wanted to replace the lighthouse with a resort, he admitted. I thought progress meant forgetting, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe some things are meant to remain not as monuments, but as teachers. The villagers nodded quietly. No one mocked him. There was only understanding. Theodore looked toward the tower. Light never asks to be seen, he said. It just keeps shining until someone notices. Mira smiled faintly. Then we should keep noticing. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit along the dock. The flames flickered like stars fallen to earth. Naomi took out a small violin and began to play. The music drifted over the water, slow and steady, a song of homecoming. Theodore leaned against the railing, watching the reflection of the lighthouse shimmer on the sea's surface. The wind carried the faintest whisper. My dearest child, the divine voice said softly, even the smallest light changes the shape of the dark. Never doubt the quiet work you do. It is the thread that holds the world together. Theodore closed his eyes. "I will not forget," he whispered. When the meal ended, the villagers lingered, unwilling to leave. The children chased fireflies near the water, and the older folk sat in silence, content to listen to the sea's gentle rhythm. Before departing, Jonah approached Theodore. "If you ever need supplies or help with repairs, the town will provide them," he said. "I think we owe the light that much." Theodore shook his hand. "We all owe the light something," he said. "It has waited long enough for us to remember." As the last of the lanterns burned low, the sea bell rang once more, slow and full of peace. It was not a farewell, but a benediction. And above it all, St. Lucia's light shone steady, not as a monument of the past, but as a living reminder that faith does not flicker, it endures. "My dearest child," the voice of God whispered one final time before sleep claimed him, "the world hungers not for greatness, but for gentleness. Feed it with love, and it will remember my face in every act of mercy." That night, the island slept in peace. The tide rose and fell with the rhythm of breathing. The bell chimed softly through the dark, and the lighthouse kept its quiet watch, its heart alive with unspoken prayer. The next morning, the sea was a mirror. The sky hung low and bright, and the wind moved as softly as breath. The waves that had once crashed with fury now rolled in with a gentleness that made the island feel half awake, half dreaming. Theodore stood on the balcony of the lantern room, watching the sun rise through a curtain of silver mist. The bell they had raised from the water days ago hung proudly on the cliff path below, glinting faintly in the light. Every now and then, the wind would pass through it and draw from it a low, steady note. The sound traveled across the island like a prayer, reminding all who heard it that patience and faith could turn rust into gold. Mira joined him, carrying a steaming cup of tea. "The bell has found its voice again," she said. "It sings even when we do nothing." Theodore smiled. "Perhaps that is the lesson, to let things be, and trust that they will sing when the time is right." They stood in silence, listening to the wind move through the cliffs. Then faintly the radio on the desk crackled. "This is Elias," came the familiar, calm voice. "2 ships due past the Cape tonight. Fog forming early. Keep the bell ready." "Thank you, Elias," Theodore replied. "The bell is ready, and so are we." As evening came, the fog arrived like a soft gray curtain. It swallowed the cliffs, the sea, and even the path leading down to the village. Only the faint glow of the lighthouse cut through it, golden and calm. The bell began to toll again, not with force but with patience, its rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Theodore stood in the lantern room, his hand resting on the window. He could not see beyond the edge of the cliff, but he could hear the echo of the bell answering itself in the mist. "My dearest child," the voice of God whispered within him, "not all warnings are loud. Some are whispers meant only for those who listen. I won." Theodore nodded silently. "Then let me keep listening." Below, Mira walked the path toward the bell, her lantern swinging at her side. The fog wrapped around her like breath. When she reached the bell, she placed her hand against its bronze surface. It was warm, as if the sea itself lived inside it. Naomi arrived from the dock, her coat damp from mist. "2 ships due tonight," she said. "We will guide them, as the old keepers did." Mira smiled. "Then St. Lucia's light will shine again." Together they stood by the bell, listening. Hours passed. The fog grew thicker, but the sound of the bell did not falter. Then, out of the gray distance, a faint horn replied. Another soon followed. "They hear us," Naomi said quietly. "They are safe." Theodore appeared beside them, his lantern glowing faintly through the mist. He looked out toward the unseen ships and whispered, "May this light remain faithful, even when no one sees it." The wind rose, and for a moment the bell's tone deepened, reaching a note so rich it felt alive. The ground beneath them seemed to hum. Mira gasped softly. "The sea is singing with it," she said. Theodore closed his eyes. "Then it remembers." "My dearest child," the divine voice spoke again, calm as the tide. "You have learned that what is buried is never lost. The bell beneath the water and the hope within the heart both wait for their time to rise." When the fog lifted by dawn, the ships had already passed safely beyond the horizon. The villagers woke to clear skies and quiet seas. The bell on the cliff was still, but every ear that heard its song through the night carried peace into the morning. Mira found Theodore on the balcony, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You did not sleep," she said. "Neither did the sea," he replied with a faint smile. "It kept me company." She looked at him for a long moment. "I think the island has accepted you," she said. He turned toward her. "And if I have accepted it, then you are home," she said simply. The bell rang once more, not for warning this time, but as if to agree. The calm did not last. 2 days later, the sky darkened again. A wall of clouds rose from the west, heavy and thick, moving with a strange, silent speed. The fishermen at the docks looked up and crossed themselves. Naomi frowned as she tied her boat to the pier. "This storm is not like the last," she said. "The air feels wrong." Elias confirmed her fear over the radio. "The front is shifting fast," he said. "Wind strong enough to snap lines. You must stay inside." Theodore stood at the base of the lighthouse, staring up at the gray sky that rolled like smoke. "We will keep the light steady," he said. By afternoon, the sea had turned black. The waves rose higher than the rocks, slamming against the cliffs with a force that made the ground tremble. The rain came sideways, stinging like needles. Inside the tower, the wind howled through the cracks, but the light still shone. Mira held onto the rail as the windows rattled. "The glass will not survive another hit like this," she shouted. "It will," Theodore said, gripping the railing. "It must." He climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room. The wind roared louder with each step. When he reached the top, water was already leaking through the seams. He placed both hands on the lantern housing and whispered a prayer without words. The light flickered, then steadied. "My dearest child," the voice of God came through the roar of the storm. "Faith is not calm water. It is holding the lamp when the wind forgets mercy." Theodore shut his eyes, letting the words settle. "Then help me hold it," he whispered. The storm struck harder. The glass groaned under pressure. Mira and Naomi secured the lower windows with boards, their clothes soaked through. The radio buzzed, Elias's voice faint but determined. "Hold fast," he said. "2 small fishing boats are still at sea. They are following your light." Naomi's breath caught. "We must keep it burning," she said. "If the light dies, they will too." Theodore pressed his hands harder against the glass. The warmth beneath his palms grew stronger. The light brightened, then brightened again, until the whole lantern room glowed like the heart of the Sunday. Outside, the wind howled, but the sea seemed to bend around the island instead of against it. The bell on the cliff began to ring, its tone deep and pure, rising above the thunder. Mira looked up through the rain. "It sounds alive again," she said, "as if something greater is moving through it." "My dearest child," the divine voice spoke to Theodore, "do not fear what you cannot control. Even storms obey when love stands unshaken." And then, as quickly as it came, the storm began to fade. The rain slowed, the wind softened, the sea's roar became a sigh. When the first ray of light broke through the clouds, the villagers stepped out of their homes. The 2 missing fishing boats appeared on the horizon, battered but intact. They had followed the light home. By evening, the island glowed beneath a calm sky once again. The waves lapped gently against the rocks. Theodore stood beside the bell, his hands still trembling. Mira approached and placed a blanket over his shoulders. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No," he said. "We did it. The light did it." Naomi joined them, her boots splashing through shallow puddles. "The sea is quiet now," she said. "It feels like it is thanking us." Theodore looked toward the horizon. "Maybe it is thanking the one who calmed it." My dearest child," came the final whisper of the night. "You have learned the truth of the storm. It does not come to destroy you. It comes to remind you that your faith was never built on calm seas." The three of them stood together until nightfall. The bell rang once in the distance, and the lighthouse glowed softly against the darkness, steady as a heartbeat. And in the quiet that followed, every soul on the island knew that the light of St. Lucia had not only survived, it had been reborn. The morning after the storm, the world gleamed with a clarity that almost hurt the eyes. The sea stretched endless and blue, broken only by white trails of foam that marked the path of retreating waves. Every leaf, every blade of grass shone with droplets that caught the light like diamonds. The air smelled of wet stone and pine. Theodore walked along the cliffs in silence. His boots sank into the soft moss, still heavy with rain. Down below, the bell swayed gently in the wind, releasing a low, steady tone that drifted out across the open water. It was no longer a call of warning. It was a song of peace. He stopped near a narrow path that wound inland toward the highlands. Father Lucian had once told him that there was a place beyond the cliffs where the world seemed made of glass, a valley where the rainwater gathered in shallow pools, reflecting everything above so perfectly that one could not tell sky from earth. It was said to be a place of seeing, where those who carried confusion might find clarity. That morning, Theodore decided to go. The trail curved through fields of grass and heather, over small wooden bridges and under arching trees. As he climbed, the air grew thin and bright, the kind of light that made colors gentler and sounds softer. When he reached the top of the ridge, the valley opened before him. Pools of water lay scattered across the basin, shimmering in the sunlight. Clouds floated in their reflections, and for a moment, it looked as though the sky itself had fallen to rest upon the earth. He took a slow breath. The silence here was alive, full of waiting. A familiar voice broke it gently. "You came," Father Lucian said, appearing behind him with his walking stick. Theodore smiled faintly. "You knew I would." "I hoped you would," the old man replied. "The valley is patient, but not forever." They walked together down into the shallow basin. The water was only ankle deep, cool and clear. Every step sent ripples outward that carried fragments of reflected clouds. "This place," Father Lucian said softly, "shows you what you need to see, not what you ask to see." Theodore knelt by one of the pools. His reflection looked back at him, older, quieter, but no longer carrying the same weariness. The light around him seemed to shimmer, bending into gentle patterns. For a moment he saw the image of the lighthouse reflected behind him, shining bright and whole. Then another image, himself as a young man, standing on a pier, letter in hand, too afraid to send it. The reflection of the younger Theodore looked up at him, eyes full of apology. "It is strange," Theodore whispered, "how much time I spent fearing the wrong things." Father Lucian smiled. "Most of us do. We fear pain when we should fear hardness. We fear silence when we should fear noise that drowns truth." Theodore nodded. "And forgiveness?" "That," Father Lucian said, "is never to be feared. Forgiveness is not an erasing, it is an awakening." Theodore closed his eyes. A warm breeze moved through the valley, stirring the water into faint ripples. The voice that had followed him through every storm came again, calm and tender. "My dearest child, you cannot see your reflection in stormy water. I calm the seas not to end your struggle, but to show you your own face again." Tears filled his eyes. They fell silently, merging with the water below. The ripples spread outward, and for a brief, perfect moment the whole valley seemed to breathe with him. When he opened his eyes again, the younger reflection was gone. The water showed only sky and sunlight. Father Lucian placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now you may go back. The light does not need a perfect keeper, only an honest one." End the prose. As they walked back toward the cliffs, the old man hummed a low tune. Theodore listened and thought that perhaps the melody had been the same one. The sea bell carried each morning a song of homecoming sung in different tongues. By the time they reached the lighthouse again, dusk had fallen. The tower glowed faintly against the pink horizon, steady and patient. Mira was waiting by the door, her hair pulled back and her eyes soft. "You were gone all day," she said. "I was listening," Theodore replied, "and now I understand a little more." She smiled, as though she understood without needing to ask. "Then the island has taught you what it meant to." That night, Theodore wrote in his journal, "I went looking for answers. I found peace instead." The wind outside the window carried the quiet tone of the bell, and far above, the stars glimmered in the same rhythm. The following week, the weather held calm. The villagers went about their work with a lighter spirit. Boats returned early, nets full and hearts content. The bell rang every morning, not as a warning, but as a greeting. One afternoon, while sorting through the old keeper's logs, Mira found a letter addressed to someone named Eleanor Tresson, the last name matching the initials carved inside Theodore's ring. She looked up sharply. "This must be the person you wrote your letter to," she said softly. Theodore froze. "Eleanor," he whispered, "it has been many years since I said that name aloud. Do you know where she is now?" He hesitated. "If she stayed where she said she would, she lives on the eastern island, but I do not know if she would want to see me." Mira studied him quietly. Maybe she does not need to want it. Maybe she needs to hear it. That evening, Theodore took the small ferry that ran between the islands. The journey was quiet. The water lay flat under a pale moon, and the only sound was the steady churn of the motor. He carried nothing with him but his coat, his ring, and a prayer he had not yet learned how to speak. The eastern island was smaller, dotted with cottages and tall pines. He found Eleanor's house easily. It stood near the water's edge, painted a soft gray with a small garden of lavender outside. He paused at the gate, uncertain, then walked forward and knocked. After a long moment, the door opened. A woman stood there, older than the face he remembered, yet unmistakably her. Her eyes widened, but she did not step back. "Theodore," she said, her voice soft, "you took your time." "I did," he admitted. "Too much of it." She smiled faintly. "You look well." "I am learning to be," he said. "And you?" "I am also learning," she said. "That is all any of us can do." He took the letter from his coat pocket, the one he had once left in silence, and handed it to her. "This should have reached you long ago." She did not open it. She simply placed her hand over it and nodded. "I think I already know what it says." They sat together on the porch, watching the water. The air between them was still, not heavy with tension, but with understanding. "I thought I had to disappear to find forgiveness," Theodore said, "but I only found distance." "And now," she asked gently, "now I know forgiveness does not erase what happened," he said. "It changes what it means." She looked at him with soft eyes. "Then you have finally come home." The voice of God came again, gentle as the evening tide. "My dearest child, mercy is not a door you must break open. It is a window you only needed to stop closing." Theodore felt warmth move through him, not dramatic, not fierce, just steady. The years of silence between him and Eleanor dissolved into quiet peace. They talked until the stars rose high. There were no grand apologies, no tears, no speeches. Only two people who had been broken once, now sharing the same calm night. When he returned to the lighthouse, Mira was waiting at the pier. She did not ask what had happened. She only looked at his face and smiled. "You have found your peace," she said. He nodded. "Yes, and it was not where I expected it." She took his hand briefly and then let it go. Peace never is. The bell on the cliff rang twice, a gentle echo over the water. Theodore looked up at the lantern room where the light burned softly. "I think," he said, "that the light was never about guiding ships. It was about guiding us." Mira smiled. "Then it has done its work." "My dearest child," the divine voice whispered one final time that night, "when shame turns into mercy, darkness turns into dawn. Keep walking toward that dawn. It never stops waiting for you." Theodore stood for a long time, watching the sea stretch into infinity. The waves came and went, each one like a heartbeat of the earth. And for the first time since he could remember, he felt entirely whole. The dawn came quietly, with thin gold light filtering through the mist that wrapped the island. The lighthouse stood tall and steady, its white walls streaked with salt and memory. Seabirds circled above the cliffs, calling out as though to announce that a new chapter had begun. Theodore woke early, as he always did now. Sleep came easier these days, like a friend instead of an escape. When he stepped outside, the air smelled of fresh paint and seaweed, of work waiting to be done. The stones under his boots were still damp from the tide. Mira was already awake, sitting by the path with her notebook open, sketching the lighthouse from a new angle. She glanced up when she saw him. "You look lighter," she said with a smile. "I feel lighter," Theodore replied. "Perhaps forgiveness is the best kind of rest." Mira nodded thoughtfully. "And now that the past is quiet, maybe the tower can speak again." They began their work after breakfast. Naomi brought tools from the dock, a hammer, brushes, and new glass panes wrapped in thick cloth. The old window that had survived so many storms was ready for repair. Theodore climbed the spiral staircase with care. Every step echoed softly, a rhythm he had grown to love. The lantern room smelled of dust and salt. When he reached the top, he placed his palm against the cracked glass. "Time to let you heal," he said quietly. He worked slowly, removing the damaged pane and brushing away flakes of old putty. Mira held the new glass steady as he fitted into place. Sunlight filtered through it like water, pure and clean. When the last screw was tightened, Theodore stepped back. The light coming through the repaired pane painted the room with warmth. It touched the walls, the floor, and their faces with a glow that felt almost alive. Naomi stood below, shading her eyes. "It's brighter," she called up, like the tower just woke from a long sleep. Mira smiled at Theodore. "You did well." He shook his head. "We did well. The light just needed someone to believe in its worth." They worked until midday, cleaning, polishing, and painting. With every stroke of the brush, the tower began to reclaim its dignity. What had once been dull stone now gleamed faintly in the sunday. As they rested on the balcony, a cool breeze swept across the sea. The bell below chimed softly, its tone gentle and low. "My dearest child," the voice of God spoke within Theodore's heart. "What you mend with your hands, I mend in your spirit. Do not think small work means little work. Every act of care holds eternity in it." Theodore closed his eyes. "Then I will keep caring," he whispered. Mira watched him quietly, her expression tender. "What do you hear when you close your eyes like that?" she asked. "Peace," he said simply, "and a voice that reminds me who I am." They spent the rest of the afternoon painting the final panels. Naomi laughed as the sea breeze caught her hair, splattering white paint across her sleeve. Now I look like part of the lighthouse, she joked. Then you belong to it, Theodore said, and it belongs to all of us. When the work was done, they stood back to admire it. The tower no longer looked tired. It looked alive, proud, and full of light. The glass caught the sun and scattered it in all directions, like a blessing sent to sea. That night, when the sky deepened into violet, the lighthouse shone softly over the water. Its glow was not blinding, but calm and constant. Fishermen in the harbor paused to look up, knowing they were safe. Mira leaned against the railing beside Theodore. It's strange, she said, how a single repaired pane can change everything. It's not strange, he said. It's faith. My dearest child, the divine voice whispered again, I do not ask you to build monuments. I ask you to keep a light burning when others grow tired. That is how heaven touches earth. Theodore smiled faintly. Then I will keep it burning, he said aloud. And from somewhere far below, as if the sea itself heard him, the bell rang once in answer. The following week brought calm skies and gentle winds. The island returned to its rhythm. Boats left the harbor at dawn. Children gathered shells along the shore, and the bell marked the hours like a steady heartbeat. The lighthouse had become more than a tower again. It had become the island's pulse. Jonah Hale, the mayor, came walking up the path one morning. His coat flapped against his legs, and his face held the look of a man who had wrestled long with his pride. Theodore and Mira were at the base of the tower, sorting supplies. When Jonah reached them, he paused, clearing his throat. It seems you have done what I could not, he said. Theodore looked up. And what is that? Given this island something worth believing in, Jonah replied. Mira smiled faintly. The island already believed. It only needed a reminder. Jonah ran a hand over the stone wall, feeling the smooth new paint. I remember when I wanted to tear this down, said it was useless, said it was costing too much to keep alive. Theodore said nothing. He let silence do the listening. I see now, Jonah continued, that what I called progress was really fear. Fear that if I stood still too long, I'd have to face what I'd lost. He turned to look out at the sea, his voice softening. When the storm came, I thought the light would fail, but it didn't, and neither did you. Theodore placed a hand on the railing. We all failed once, he said, but grace lets us begin again. Jonah smiled weakly. Grace, he said, tasting the word. It's been a long time since I used that word without cynicism. Mira handed him a brush and a small can of white paint. Then start again now, she said gently. Help us finish the last wall. He hesitated, then took it. Together they climbed the steps and began to paint. The sound of their brushes was rhythmic, almost musical. Naomi passed by with tools and called up, Look at that, the mayor doing real work. The sea must be smiling today. Jonah laughed, the sound awkward but genuine. Maybe it is, he said. They worked all afternoon, the sun warming their backs, the air filled with the scent of paint and sea spray. Jonah's hands, unused to labor, trembled at first, but soon found their rhythm. As they rested, Theodore said, You do not have to make grand gestures to atone, Jonah. Sometimes the smallest work is enough. Jonah looked at him, and sometimes the smallest forgiveness changes the largest heart. My dearest child, the divine voice spoke to Theodore's heart. The proud learn humility not by falling, but by lifting others beside them. When you choose mercy over victory, you build what lasts beyond your years. Theodore glanced at Jonah, who was staring at the sea. The island has forgiven you, he said softly. Now you must forgive yourself. Jonah nodded slowly. Maybe I can, now that the light is back. Ender too. When the last wall was finished, the three of them stood back to look. The lighthouse gleamed pure white under the evening sun, a symbol of renewal. Jonah let out a quiet laugh. "It's beautiful," he said. "I never thought I'd see it like this again." Naomi arrived with a small bundle of bread and tea. "You earned this," she said, handing Jonah a cup. "One day of honest work and already you're part of the island again." Jonah looked at her, surprised. "Was I ever not?" "Only when you forgot to listen," Naomi said gently. They ate together on the steps, sharing simple food and quiet conversation. The sun lowered toward the horizon, turning the sea to liquid gold. The bell rang in the distance, its note long and sweet. The sound carried far out across the water. Theodore closed his eyes for a moment. "The bell sounds different today," he said. "It does," Mira agreed. "It sounds happy." "Azet, my dearest child," the divine voice whispered softly, "joy is not a storm that arrives. It is the tide that rises slowly once the wind learns to rest." As night fell, lanterns were lit along the dock below. Jonah stood before leaving and said quietly, "If you need supplies or help, the town will give what it can. The lighthouse will never go dark again. I'll see to that." Theodore smiled. "Then you have already kept your promise." "I breathe." The mayor tipped his hat and walked down the path, his shadow long in the evening light. When he was gone, Mira leaned against the railing beside Theodore. "It seems even the hardest hearts can soften," she said. "They always can," Theodore replied. "Stone only stays cold until someone warms it." The light flickered softly behind them, painting the sky with gold. The sea below shimmered, and the bell gave one last gentle tone before silence settled again. And in that silence, Theodore heard a whisper not from wind or waves, but from something far older. "My dearest child, the heart you heal will always reflect the light you keep." He bowed his head, smiled, and whispered into the fading day, "Then let me keep healing." The fog rolled in before dawn, thick and silver, covering the island in silence so deep that even the bell hesitated to sound. The air was heavy and still, and the sea, usually a chorus of rhythm, had gone quiet as if holding its breath. The lighthouse stood above the veil, its soft light faintly visible through the gray. Theodore woke to the sound of droplets tapping against the window. When he opened the door, the fog pressed against him like a living thing. He could barely see a few feet ahead. Mira appeared from the mist, a lantern in her hand. "It came in fast," she said. "Naomi can't take the boats out. The harbor is invisible." Theodore nodded, listening to the strange hush that wrapped around them. "Then we must let the light speak louder today." They climbed to the lantern room. The beam turned in slow circles, cutting through the fog in measured sweeps. From time to time, the bell below gave a muted tone, its sound swallowed almost immediately. "The fog wants to test us," Mira said softly, "as if it wants to see if we'll still trust what we cannot see." Theodore smiled faintly. "Then let it test us. Faith does not need distance to see clearly." Hours passed. The fog did not lift. The air grew colder. Even inside the tower, their breath came out in pale clouds. Theodore sat by the window, eyes fixed on the shifting gray. He had never felt the island so still, nor the silence so large. "My dearest child," came the divine voice, calm as ever, "do not curse the fog. I send it to teach you that light is not meant to conquer darkness, but to live within it until the dawn returns." Theodore whispered, "Then I will wait." Mira sat beside him, her hands clasped around her cup of tea. "You know," she said softly, "when I first came here, I was afraid of fog. It felt like being erased. And now? Now I think it's a kind of mercy," she said. "The fog hides what we're not ready to face, until we've learned how to see again." They waited together as the day passed into evening. Around sunset, a faint horn echoed far out at sea, a boat trying to find its way. Naomi's voice crackled through the radio. "One of the small fishing boats lost its bearings. They can't find the harbor." "Then we guide them," Theodore said. He adjusted the beam so that it faced the open water. The bell began to ring again, steady and patient. Mira whispered prayers between the tolls. Minutes turned into an hour. Then, faintly through the fog, the sound of an engine came, a struggling hum, then shouts. The boat appeared at last, shadowed and slow, guided by the light. "They're safe," Naomi's voice said over the radio, filled with relief. Theodore closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "My dearest child," the divine voice said gently, "you see now that even in blindness, the light within you knows where home is." By dawn, the fog began to lift. The sky returned, soft and blue. The sea breathed again. Mira smiled as the first sunlight broke through. "The island passed its trial," she said. Theodore looked toward the horizon. "No," he said quietly, "the trial was mine." A few days after the fog lifted, Celine, the island's archivist, came to the lighthouse carrying a bundle of old papers tied with ribbon. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes carried the calm patience of someone who had spent her life reading stories others had forgotten. "I think these belong here," she said, setting the bundle on the table. Theodore untied the ribbon. Inside were pages of the old lighthouse ledger, the record of keepers, storms, and prayers written across decades. Some pages were smudged with salt, others faintly singed from candlelight. "I found a pattern," Celine said quietly. "Every line written in this book matches the date of a hardship someone faced on the island. It's as if the keepers wrote prayers for the living, not just records for the dead." Mira traced a finger down the page. The words were simple. A ship lost its signal, but a child dreamed of light. The ship was found at dawn. Theodore felt a shiver run through him. "They were writing what they heard," he said, "not what they saw." Celine nodded. "Each entry is a conversation between faith and the unknown." That evening they gathered the villagers by the dock. Father Lucian came, Naomi brought lamps, and Jonah carried the newly repaired bell rope. Celine laid the ledger open on a wooden table, the sea breeze turning the pages slowly. "We will read the names aloud," she said, "so that none are forgotten." One by one they read through the entries: keepers, sailors, villagers, fishermen. For every name, the bell sounded once. The tone carried far out into the calm night. As Theodore read, he found the last page blank. Without thinking, he picked up a pen and wrote, "May those who keep the light remember that it also keeps them." When he finished, he closed the ledger. The sea glowed faintly under the moonlight. "My dearest child," the voice of God whispered, "you have learned the purpose of memory. It is not to bind you to pain, but to make gratitude holy." That night the village slept peacefully. The lighthouse glowed like a star at the edge of the world. Theodore stood by the radio the next morning, hesitating. The buttons gleamed softly under his fingers. Mira watched from the window but said nothing. "It has been years since I spoke to my brother," Theodore said quietly. "We left one another in anger." "Then maybe now is the time to call," she said. "Not to fix the past, but to let the silence end." He nodded, turning the dial. The static filled the air, soft and alive. When he heard his brother's voice, older, lower, but still familiar, his throat tightened. "Theodore," the voice said, "I wondered when you'd call." "I didn't know if I should," Theodore said. "You should have," his brother replied gently, "but I'm glad you did." They spoke for an hour. They did not revisit old arguments. They spoke of weather, the sea, and the strange beauty of getting older. At the end, his brother said, "You sound different." "I feel different," Theodore said. "The island is teaching me to listen." There was a long pause, then his brother said softly, "Then keep listening. It suits you." When the call ended, Theodore felt something quiet settle in his heart, a door closing without pain. "My dearest child," the divine voice said, "reconciliation is not loud. It is the moment the heart unclenches and calls home without shame." That night, he stood on the balcony. The sea spread before him like silk. The bell chimed once. The sound carried a peace that words could not hold. By the end of summer, the lighthouse was fully restored. Its walls gleamed white, its windows clear as morning, and its stairs no longer groaned underfoot. The villagers decided to celebrate. They called it the Feast of Repairs. Tables were set up near the dock. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between the boats. There was laughter, music, and the smell of bread baking in the wind. Naomi roasted fish over an open flame. Mira arranged flowers from the hills. Even Jonah brought baskets of fruit from the mainland. Father Lucian stood before the crowd, his smile gentle. "We gather not to praise the work, but to remember why we worked," he said. "To mend is to love." Theodore looked around. The faces glowed in the lantern light, people once weary, now whole. He realized that the island itself had been repaired, not just the tower. He lifted his glass. "To the light," he said, "to what it taught us, and to what it still will." The crowd echoed his words. The bell rang once, joining the toast. Later that night, music filled the air. Mira and Theodore walked by the water. She smiled. "The light is safe now," she said. "It is," he agreed, "and so are we." She looked at him carefully. "You speak like a man who has found what he was searching for." "I think I found what I was meant to give instead," he said softly. "My dearest child," came the voice of God, warm as the firelight, "every act of healing you give becomes a seed I plant elsewhere. Nothing you mend stays small." Mira looked toward the lighthouse, glowing in the dark. "It's strange," she said. "It used to guide ships, now it guides hearts." Theodore smiled. Perhaps that was always its purpose. The island danced late into the night, laughter mingling with the soft ringing of the bell. When the feast ended, the island fell back into quiet rhythm. The villagers returned to their homes, the lights in the cottages flickering out one by one. The sea was calm again, a wide field of silver under the moon. Theodore stayed at the lighthouse. It was his turn to keep the night watch. Mira had left a pot of tea and a blanket at the base of the stairs. "For company," she had said before leaving. He climbed to the lantern room. The light turned slowly, sweeping the horizon with calm certainty. Below, the bell swayed gently in the wind. Theodore stood by the window, listening to the deep breathing of the sea. He thought of everything the island had given him: peace, forgiveness, and a new beginning. The voice that had guided him through every storm came once more, tender and steady. "My dearest child, you have learned that light does not shout. It waits. It does not conquer. It stays. You are the keeper of that staying. When you rest, rest in that truth." He whispered, "Thank you." He sat in silence for hours, watching the stars rise. The beam of the lighthouse turned in its quiet rhythm, touching the dark water again and again. It felt less like duty and more like prayer. Near midnight, a gull perched on the railing, feathers ruffled by the wind. Theodore smiled. "Even you cannot sleep, can you?" he murmured. The gull tilted its head, then took flight, disappearing into the darkness. When dawn began to break, the light faded into the first gold of morning. The bell gave one last tone. Theodore leaned against the railing, breathing in the salt air. He whispered to the sea, "The light does not need me anymore." "My dearest child," came the reply, soft and sure, "it never needed you to exist. It needed you to remember why it shines." Theodore nodded. The sea shimmered like glass. The world was still, and for the first time the keeper of St. Lucia's light felt that the watch he had been given was not a burden but a blessing. He folded his hands, closed his eyes, and let the new day begin. The morning after the long night watch, the island awoke in golden silence. The sea shimmered beneath a clear sky, gentle as breath. The villagers moved slowly through their morning routines, lighting stoves, mending nets, sweeping porches. It was as if everyone knew something sacred had quietly passed during the night. Theodore stepped outside the lighthouse and stretched, the cool air wrapping around him like a blessing. The sea breeze tugged softly at his coat. Down by the dock, Naomi was loading crates onto her ferry, her whistle cutting through the morning calm. She waved when she saw him. "Still awake?" she called. "Barely," Theodore replied, smiling, "but I could not have slept anyway. The world feels too peaceful to waste in dreams." Mira appeared from the path, carrying a basket of bread and fruit. Her eyes were bright, and her voice held a calm happiness. "You did it," she said. "The light stayed through the night." "It did," he answered, "but I think it no longer needed me to keep it steady." Mira handed him a piece of warm bread. "Maybe that is the point," she said. "A keeper's greatest success is when the light can stand on its own." Tut. They ate together on the rocks, watching sunlight scatter across the waves. Every sound, the rustle of grass, the hum of the wind, felt like part of a larger prayer. "Do you ever wonder," Theodore asked, "what happens when the work is done, when the repairs are finished, the storms are calmed, and the past is forgiven?" Mira smiled softly. "Then you live," she said, "not as a man fixing what is broken, but as one who remembers what is whole." Her words stayed with him long after she left. As the sun climbed higher, Theodore walked along the cliff path. He paused near the bell and touched its bronze surface. It was warm under his hand. The sound it gave was faint but full of depth, like a heartbeat beneath the island's skin. "My dearest child," the divine voice said, tender and steady, "you once asked for a new beginning, but I gave you something better, a continuation made holy by peace." Theodore smiled. "Then I will walk this peace into the days ahead." That afternoon, Jonah arrived with a group of children. They carried flowers from the hills and placed them around the base of the lighthouse. "A gift," Jonah said, "for the keeper who reminded us to listen." Theodore's voice caught as he thanked them. "It was never my voice you heard," he said. "It was the one that speaks through every quiet heart." As evening fell, the bell rang once more, slow, beautiful, and sure. The villagers turned toward the sound and bowed their heads. The sea glowed faintly, as if reflecting something greater than sunlight. Theodore stood at the door of the lighthouse and whispered, "Thank you." And the sea, faithful as always, whispered back in the language of waves. Before dawn, the world held its breath. The sky was pale silver, and the sea lay still, waiting for the first touch of morning. Theodore climbed to the lantern room one last time. The steps no longer groaned beneath his weight. They sang softly with each footfall. He opened the door to the balcony. The horizon stretched before him, endless, calm, whole. He placed both hands on the railing and closed his eyes. The scent of the salt air filled his lungs. He thought of every moment that had brought him here, the storm that tested him, the bell that sang him awake, the letter he had finally let go of, and the people who had become his family. The silence between the waves spoke louder than any sermon. "My dearest child," the divine voice whispered one final time, "this is where you rest, not in the absence of struggle, but in the fullness of peace. Keep the light within you steady, and it will guide more than ships. It will guide hearts." Tears blurred his vision, but he did not wipe them away. He looked out over the sea, watching the horizon blush with the first glow of dawn. The light broke gently, spilling gold over the cliffs and the water. The bell rang once, clear and tender, as if to greet the day. Mira arrived beside him, her coat pulled tight against the breeze. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You're staying, aren't you?" "Yes," Theodore said, "but not to guard the light, to live by it." They stood together as the sun rose fully, its warmth soft on their faces. The tower shone pure white in the morning. From below, the sound of laughter echoed from the village. The island was alive again. Theodore whispered, "Every ending is just light returning to where it began." And as the day grew bright, the lighthouse kept its steady beam silent, faithful, eternal. This story is not only about rebuilding a lighthouse, but about rebuilding the human heart. Through Theodore's journey, we are reminded that faith is not about power, it is about patience. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is strength wrapped in gentleness. Each chapter is a reflection of something we all face. The storms that shake us, the fogs that blind us, and the quiet moments that heal us. Theodore's voice is the voice of anyone who has been lost and found again, anyone who has chosen to listen rather than speak. The island, the bell, the sea, and the divine whisper all exist to remind us of one truth. Light was never meant to shine only outward. It was meant to live inside us, to guide our steps when the world turns dark. My dearest child, as this story closes, may you remember that peace is not an ending, it is the continuation of love made visible. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like, it helps the light reach others who may need it. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. I would love to hear what part spoke to you most. And if you wish to continue this journey of quiet stories, faith, and healing, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter. May the light stay with you, always.